On a salt flat at low tide, a midwife named May sat on a weathered wooden bench. The flat stretched endlessly around her, silver and still in the morning light, like an ancient mirror reflecting the vast sky above. A cool sea breeze whispered across the expanse. Beside her, a stranger approached. He wore old trousers and a patched coat, his hair windblown from his long walk. May watched as he moved slowly towards her bench, careful to avoid any remaining pools of water. She offered him a place beside her without speaking, and he nodded gratefully before sitting down. They sat in silence for some time, the quiet space between them growing comfortable. The horizon seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each change in light. May's eyes were distant, perhaps recalling births she had witnessed, or simply observing the passage of another day. The stranger broke the silence first, turning slightly towards her as he spoke quietly. Sometimes it seems like the tide is inside us too. May nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tracing a line on the wooden bench. Yes, she agreed softly. I know what you mean. They watched as a lone seagull circled overhead, its wings catching the early sun's rays. The bird dipped and soared, drawing circles in the air that echoed the ripples left behind by receding waves. What brings you here? May asked after another moment of quiet. The stranger looked out across the flat, his gaze distant. I'm walking back home, he said simply, after a long journey. Do you have family waiting? He shrugged slightly, looking at her sideways with a faint smile. Some say no one waits for anyone these days. May chuckled softly and shook her head. She turned to him then, leaning closer as if sharing something private. I think everyone waits, she said. We all hold on to hope that someone will come walking across the tide towards us. Her words seemed to stir something within him. He met her gaze squarely, a small spark of recognition in his eyes. After another quiet while, May rose from the bench. She stretched and looked down at the stranger. Come, let me show you where I keep my herbs. They grow by the water's edge. He followed her lead without hesitation, rising to his feet as well. As they walked towards a cluster of bushes near the low tide line, their conversation turned to practical matters, when the plants would be ready for harvest, what remedies could be made from them. Underneath the quiet exchange, an understanding passed between them, unspoken yet unmistakable. When May finally handed him a small bag filled with dried herbs as they parted ways, there was no need for thanks or goodbyes. The salt flat had offered its own lesson in their shared solitude and mutual care. The stranger watched her walk away, the bag swinging lightly at his side. He took one last look out over the flat where it stretched cold and wide beneath a pale sky, before turning to head towards home.
You're listening to The Empty Teahouse. A single star appeared on the horizon as if testing the night's chill, heralding dusk and an empty tea house where two women sit by lantern light.
At dusk, the village tea house was empty except for Lynn and her niece, May. They sat together on bamboo mats in front of steaming cups of tea. The evening light filtered through paper lanterns hanging from rafters, casting soft shadows over their faces. Lynn had recently returned to the village after a long absence. She hadn't expected much but found herself drawn back here by memories and an urge she couldn't explain. Tonight was her first night home, spent in quiet companionship with May. Remember when Grandpa used to tell us stories? Lynn asked, stirring her tea slowly. May nodded. He would sit here just like this. Tell us about the old days. He loved this tea house, said Lynn softly, sipping from her cup and feeling its warmth travel down into her chest. May picked up a wooden chopstick that had fallen beside her plate and began idly tapping it on her empty tea saucer. He used to leave little notes for us around the house when we were younger. Lynn smiled at the thought, remembering similar notes she'd left in May's life as an aunt, but it was different with her father. What did his notes say? May shrugged. Sometimes just things like the best things are simple, or life is a cup of tea. Simple, Lynn echoed. She placed the teacup down beside her and looked out at the night sky through an open window. The air was cool, with only a hint of rain. Lynn? May said, breaking into her thoughts. Yes? Do you ever think about Grandpa's place? The herbalist's back room came to mind, a quiet space lined with jars and drawers filled with dried plants and herbs, each one marked carefully by its name in small script. Lynn had always loved the solitude of it all. Sometimes, she replied. Though I'm not sure why. May glanced out the window too, her eyes tracing the outline of distant hills under moonlight. Then back to Lynn. Do you want to go there? Lynn shook her head slightly but didn't say anything for a moment. The silence stretched between them like a fine thread. I've been thinking, she said finally, that maybe I should see if the herbalist still needs help. It's what he taught me. May looked at her aunt in surprise. Really? Lynn smiled again, this time more warmly. Maybe it would be good to do something familiar for a change. Outside, crickets chirped softly. The tea house seemed quieter now that dusk had deepened into night. The two women stood up and gathered their belongings quietly without speaking much. As they walked the dark paths back home, Lynn placed her hand gently on May's shoulder, feeling the warmth from beneath her clothing as if to say, I am here. Reaching the front door of her childhood home, Lynn turned toward the small garden gate leading to Grandpa's place. She paused there for a moment before stepping through, her niece following behind. The path was overgrown but clear enough. It wound around and up to the herbalist's back room where old books and herbs awaited. In the faint light of dawn, Lynn straightened the last jar on its shelf and then turned back to May, who stood quietly beside her. A breeze blew through, carrying with it a subtle scent of lavender. Thank you, Lynn said softly to May. May smiled in return and placed her hand gently over the small garden gate as they prepared to leave together for home.
The gate creaked softly as they closed it behind them, leaving room for a rice paddy at late autumn's dusky end, its stubble like spent feathers waiting to rise again.
In late autumn, when leaves had fallen and left the trees bare against gray skies, there was a small rice paddy at the edge of town. Here, the stubble from last year's harvest lay crumpled on the ground like spent feathers, awaiting spring to grow anew. Each morning, before the sun rose too high, an old woman would come by with her battered tea cart, offering warmth and solace to those who worked here. One day, as she made her rounds along the muddy tracks between the rows of paddy fields, she met a young man pulling a rickety wooden plow behind him. His hands were rough and worn from labor, calluses thick like leather shields against the earth. He was alone, except for his shadow that stretched long behind him, as if it too bore the weight of hard work. The old woman set up her cart just near where he stopped to rest. She poured steaming tea into chipped cups and placed them carefully in front of him, saying nothing but acknowledging with a nod and a slight smile. He thanked her without looking up from his hands, which now were turned over on the ground as if they themselves needed healing. She watched him for a moment, then began to walk along the furrows where he had just plowed. Picking up bits of broken straw and discarded husks, she carefully placed them back into neat piles at intervals behind him. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the field, marking time with each grain shadow. When she returned to her cart, it was filled a bit less than when she had left. She picked out a particularly jagged piece of straw and brought it over to where he sat. He looked up from his hands, puzzled at first by what she offered him. Slowly, understanding dawned as she showed him how this stray item might tangle in the machinery if left behind. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking it from her outstretched hand and placing it among other tidbits of straw on his cart to haul back into town for burning later. She nodded again and went about preparing another cup of tea. He took it this time with both hands, cradling the warmth not just in them, but across his chest too. A moment passed as they both drank silently, each aware somehow that something had shifted between them. But no words were needed. As she packed up her cart to leave, he followed behind her, carrying a small sack of rice he had gathered from the field. He placed it next to her teapot without a word, then walked back into the rising heat and dust of his workday. She paused as he moved away, watching him until even his shadow disappeared among the stubble. When she finally set off herself, heading back through town's sleepy streets, an old man carrying a water jug passed by her on the opposite side of the lane. He tipped his head slightly in acknowledgement without stopping, and she did the same as they walked past each other. It was a simple gesture, but as she continued home, the sound of his footsteps echoed softly against the stones long after he had turned away.
The sun's edge touched the horizon, casting the world in amber glow, then fades into twilight hours where an old hut on a mountain pass stands against whispers of the sea.
In the twilight hours of a quiet evening, a woman carrying a small basket approached a hut on a mountain pass. The path was rough and steep, but she moved with steady steps. Near the top, where the wind carried whispers of the sea far below, stood the old hut, its wooden frame weathered by time. Inside, an older man sat at a table covered in maps and sketches, his hands calloused from years of drawing the mountains around him. His name was Koji, but to her, he was simply the cartographer. She knocked gently on the thin wall and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," he called out, not looking up from his work. She pushed open the door and placed her basket down beside it, then took a seat across from him. He glanced up briefly before returning to his task, moving his pen carefully over the paper as if each stroke was an important decision. After a moment of silence, she spoke softly, "I brought some tea leaves." He nodded but didn't look away from his drawing. She opened her basket and removed 2 small cups and a simple wooden teapot. The sound of water boiling in a kettle nearby filled the room. When it had finished, he poured himself a cup without looking up. She watched him for a while, then started to pour herself some tea. As she did, he lifted his gaze from his work to her, their eyes meeting briefly before he went back to drawing. Once again, silence settled between them until Koji set down his pen and looked at her fully. "Thank you," he said simply, then picked up the cup in front of him. She smiled slightly and sipped her tea, watching how he traced a line on the map with deliberate care, as if committing it to memory. Hours passed without much conversation until finally, Koji put down his pen and stretched. He looked over at her. She had dozed off, her head resting against one arm of the chair. He quietly moved across the room to fetch another blanket from a chest and draped it gently over her shoulders as he went back to sit at his table. As evening turned to night, the cartographer stood up to check on the small fire outside. He carried a cup of tea with him when he returned inside and sat down once more beside the sleeping woman. The fire cast long shadows through the window, dancing over their still forms in the dim light. Eventually, she stirred awake at the sound of his breathing. She blinked into the half-light, feeling the weight of the blanket on her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, but he was already looking back down at his drawing, lost in its intricacies. She stood up and gathered her things, bowing slightly to him before heading towards the door. "Good night," she said softly over her shoulder. He responded with a nod as if in agreement or perhaps just acknowledging her presence there one more time. Outside under the darkening sky, she paused by his hut for only a moment longer, turning back towards it once more. In that instant, something caught her eye, a faint light from behind the window where Koji still sat, deep into night. She nodded to herself and walked on, down the mountain path towards home.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again at dusk's approach. Beneath gray skies and crunching leaves, a modest tea stand waits for visitors.
Late autumn in the village square, leaves crunch underfoot. Gray stone benches wait empty under a cold sky. At one end of the marketplace stands a modest stand with tea in clay jars and dried herbs hung from rafters. An old woman tends to her stock, her movements slow but sure. A young girl approaches the stand, her face tight with disappointment. She carries an empty tin cup, as if she's been hoping for more than what's offered here today. The old woman notices the child's dejected air and offers a kind nod. "Anything I can help you with, dear?" Her voice is soft but clear, like a whisper in still air. The girl shakes her head, then speaks up despite her obvious reluctance. "I was going to get some tea for my grandmother," she says quietly. "But it's too late now." The old woman smiles gently and pats the tin cup with gentle fingers. "Well, you could try something else. I've got a fine chamomile that might lift your spirits." She reaches into her stock and pulls out a small paper packet. "Here," she says, placing it in the girl's hand along with a few coins for payment. "Take this to your grandmother. It may make both of you feel better." The girl takes the gift hesitantly, but accepts without protest. With the package in her pocket, she looks up at the old woman, who seems to read something unspoken on her face. "Your grandmother will be happy," the old woman says kindly. "And sometimes it's not just about what you give, but what comes back." The girl nods, though whether she understands or merely agrees isn't clear. She gives a shy smile and walks away, leaving the tea seller to watch until she disappears around the corner of the market house. As dusk falls, the old woman stands up from her stand, stretching slightly before picking up her bag to head home. On the way out, the girl reappears with a bouquet of flowers picked from the garden outside. She moves quietly, as if in a dream, and places them gently on the counter where the tea jars once stood. The old woman watches the flowers for a moment, then reaches out slowly to touch their soft petals. A small smile plays at her lips, and she turns back towards home, her steps lighter than before.
The lantern light flickered softly in her hand as she turned the corner, casting long shadows behind her. Each story's end marks another beginning, like spring rising from autumn stubble. The tea house closes for the night. Until tomorrow.